What is going on, Guardians? Ember here with another one for you. Today we are gonna use a Threadling build for PvE. It's one of the strongest builds in PvE currently in Destiny 2, and I'll show you how to use it in high-end content. And if you found this build before or after the final shape, I will have options that you can use so that it will still be incredibly powerful. Before we get too far into it, let's head down below this video, absolutely obliterate that like and subscribe button, and let me know if this is the kind of content you like to see. Without further ado, let's get to it. Alright, so let's briefly go over what we have in the subclass screen here, and then we'll talk about why all of this is so incredibly powerful once we get into the gameplay. But we're using the Swarmers. What those do is destroying a Tangle spawns a Threadling, and your Threadlings unravel targets that they damage. And we're going to be pairing that with Merciless because Solar and Strand go so well together this season. And we're going to be pairing that again with a Rufus's Fury with rewind rounds and target lock. It's really, really strong for this build. We'll talk about why once we get into the gameplay. As far as the subclass goes, we just want to make sure we're equipping that Threadling grenade. I'm going with the Wanderer aspect. That's pretty much mandatory for a Threadling build currently right now. The next aspect is kind of up to you. However, I really suggest that you use Mind Spun Invocation so that you can consume that grenade and send your Threadlings out a little bit more targeted all across the battlefield. You can kind of pick and choose which enemies and directions you want to send those Threadlings out to a little bit easier. And as far as our fragments go, there are three that are very, very important for this build. We have Thread of Rebirth, Strand Weapon, Final Blows have a chance to create a Threadling. Just another way we're going to be popping out tons of those little minions all over the place. And just as importantly, the Thread of Evolution, Threadlings travel further and deal additional damage, is incredibly strong with a Threadlings build. Of course, I'm sure that comes as no surprise. Then we have Thread of Generation. Dealing damage generates grenade energy, and that's any source of damage. So we're going to get those Threadling grenades back super quick. We're going to perch them by consuming the grenades, so we get 5, and then we're going to go to town. The last fragment is kind of up to you. Personally, I go with Thread of Wisdom so that when we defeat those suspended targets, we get an extra orb of power so we can get the unraveling rounds for this season. There's another option if you're looking at this video and we're past the release of Nightfall. There's another option that I might recommend as well, but this one is really, really great also. So let's check out the artifact here. Right here, the only things you really need to pay attention to are the unraveling orbs and the Horde shuttle. Everything else on here is pretty standard for what we've been using this season so far. And lastly, here are our mods. And then without further ado, let's check out some of that gameplay.
Yesterday, you said tomorrow, so just do it!
Alright, so most importantly with this build, there are two aspects that I'm pairing together here, obviously. And one of them is completely mandatory. You definitely need to have this. It is the Wanderer. And it is going to give us a near infinite loop of Threadlings and Tangles when we're pairing them with our Swarmers here. And this aspect reads, Tangles you throw or shoot suspend targets around them. And so essentially when you throw a Tangle, you'll see it attached to enemies sometimes, or when you blow it up, you'll see it kind of explode, but then do a secondary detonation after that. And that secondary detonation is going to suspend all those targets around, allowing you easy cleanups. The second part of this aspect is really where our infinite loop comes from. Threadling Final Blows create Tangles. So if you remember from the Swarmers, every time we destroy a Tangle, it's going to spawn 2 Threadlings, and then so those Threadlings can then go out and create more Tangles, and that is where we get a whole bunch of the power from this build. This second aspect that we're using is Mind Spun Invocation so that we can perch 5 Threadlings at will. Now you can use Weave Walk as well, but that's going to consume some of your melee energy and you lose a fragment slot. Now that one is great, however, I really don't like having to spend my melee energy for that, because if I don't have any of my uptimes on my cooldowns besides my melee, since there are 3 charges, you usually have at least one. that's a really easy way to make a tangle on demand and then get right back into the loop that you have. It's just a little bit more forgiving to not have that, and then also not plan to overextend yourself in a big fight. As far as fragments go, there are 3 that are absolutely mandatory. The Thread of Generation states dealing damage generates grenade energy. That's any damage. And since we're using the Threadling grenade and consuming it constantly, we're going to want as much grenade energy as possible, because that is going to be the main way that we get our Threadlings perched all on our body and then send them out to go wreak havoc. The second fragment that we're using is Thread of Rebirth. Strand weapon final blows give a chance to create a Threadling. And I don't think we even really need to go too far in why that is incredibly strong. Since we want to get as many Threadlings as possible, it seems kind of like a no-brainer. And lastly, the Thread of Evolution is obviously super important, because that's going to help our Threadlings travel further without despawning, and they're going to deal much more damage. Now, here is where I'm going to give you 2 optional fragments. If it is before the final shape release, I know we're about a week or 2 before that, I recommend that you use the Thread of Wisdom, which defeating suspended targets creates an orb of power. That is really, really strong with this, since we're suspending so many targets, and we have the Unraveling Orbs perk in the artifact, so we can keep that loop of unraveling rounds going. It just makes it a little easier, and then picking up orbs also for your subclass, since we're using grenade kickstarts, is just really strong and synergizes super well. And if it is after the release of Final Shape and we do not have access to that Unraveling Orbs perk anymore, I would probably swap that out for Thread of Propagation, which states powered melee final blows grant unraveling rounds. And specifically because of that recommendation, that's why it's important to make sure that we are running Mind Spun Invocation, so that we are not constantly consuming our melee energy, because that's going to be the main way that we get unraveling rounds after Final Shape, assuming that they do not have an easy way to get them from the artifact mods. And finally, rounding out the build here are our artifact mods that we're using this season, Season 23, that are just popping off all Strand and Solar combinations. I mean, it's been happening all season, so it's absolutely no surprise that we're going to be using Unraveling Orbs here. We're going to be using Horde Shuttle, which just gives a chance to create a Threadling whenever you're dealing Strand damage with your weapon. And then we want to make sure we're pairing Torch and Flint Striker so that we can get Radiant and then deal even more damage with any of our weapons or abilities on unraveled targets. And that is really going to take this build into the stratosphere. You're going to be able to clear huge waves of enemies all by yourself, and easily. It's going to make it a breeze. And Guardians, that's going to have to be all for me for now. I know that we recently got a blog post detailing all of the changes coming in the Final Shape. They're nerfing well, they're nerfing bubbles, and I want to know what you think about all that. What combinations are you most excited to see in the Final Shape now that they're reworking all of that stuff? And what do you hope for day one? Are you excited that we're not going to be relying so heavily on Wells for that, for all of our DPS and things like that? So let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from the community on this one. And Guardians, until next time, be without form, swift as lightning.